situations and how things led and occurred to being aggressive, to yelling, to the other person being aggressive and yelling, and so forth. Just, argument from being a normal argument to being a rough argument to being a loud argument. And so when I understood the whole process in my head, I was able to acknowledge the triggers of me being quiet and then somebody blaming me. And so behavior problems were something that I would have to analyze, and being able to understand, like, why things get to a certain point. Like, what made me upset? What made me nervous? What made me anxious? What made me this and that? And so which is the same process. What caused me to yell? What caused the other person to yell? And so forth. My situation is probably like a lot of other situations, but I analyzed it in a certain way of taking responsibility for my actions. I did understand where I would get my motions and gestures and stuff like that, which of course is always through our family members and stuff. It's the same way that we all are taught in life. But when it comes to the behaviors itself, it's different from a person teaching us how to throw a ball or how to play a sport, and when a parent teaches us to do something, whether it's like laundry or dishes, we end up sticking to that routine in the same way, but in a little bit different manner, whether, different being organizing different or whatever, but the neutralness of how a parent teaches you, we usually always, keep that with us at times, because that's what we were first taught. And so that part is a little bit different from what caused a person to act differently when it came to triggering an emotion. Why the emotion was triggered in the first place and how it got triggered. For me, I was able to analyze 2 marriages, 2 different women, and so I was able to understand my first marriage first, which was always a blameful act, and me being a very quiet person and didn't have too many friends, and knowing that I was at least trying, somewhat of my best, it was always a blameful matter towards me, and then being, ridiculed and made fun of a little bit, I guess. And so as the blame came, I was trying to find the blame, like, well, how did I do something wrong? And by the time I was analyzing that, the spouse in the first marriage would then come with a remark that would try to affect me, whether it was being made fun of or a put down or a cut down or whatever it is. And from that point, it was like I wasn't even able to analyze what I was getting blamed for. And there was a lot of that in the first marriage. And then, of course, arguments with whether it was bills or whatever, there's always an argument. And so second marriage was kind of the same thing, a little bit different, but, same thing, aggressive behaviors and yelling and so forth. And so anyways, in the second marriage, like I said before, it would always draw back to the past. Now, at that point, I was able to understand what she was talking about, take responsibility for what she was blaming me for, if it was pinpointed to a certain subject or a certain time. And so, sorries and understanding and won't go through that again or whatever, seemed like it was all that was needed. But you're talking about 13-year marriage and going back to the first year of it for a person to get that sorry. Now, getting that sorry didn't do anything because I understood it was an excuse. And so the behavior itself was me understanding that there needed to be an understanding of not arguing back. And arguing back was my biggest downfall. And so when I was able to understand all my truth as far as everything I admitted to, then I was able to release whatever I was being blamed for and why the arguments have occurred. So that allowed me, in a sense, to self-forgive, to forgive myself, and not getting it from the other person because the other person wouldn't understand. And so at that point, that led me to understand truth. And when you know all the truth about yourself, and you can admit everything that you've done wrong, not only to yourself, but to the other person, it creates a line. It creates a line to where you know in your head that you did what you can do, like you did right. You took away every argument that you can fight back with, right? And so at that point, during conversations, it was a conversation that was humble and quiet, and I was able to listen and understand what the other person was talking about. Now, understanding what the other person was talking about, even though they wanted to still talk about the past, I myself already took care of the past and admitted truth to myself. And so, at that point, the person that admitted truth to themselves is waiting for the other person to be responsive. Now, the other person's response, you're able to see 10 times more because you're not arguing back. You're not yelling or nothing. And so, towards a certain time, there's always, it's a relationship, right? There's always two people apologizing or being sincere or being empathetic towards each other. So at that point, I understood that my humbleness, my quietness, my different response to an argument was getting the other person upset. So at that point, I would try to communicate in a way of trying to understand instead of trying to prove a point or trying to explain in a yelling manner. And so at that point, me trying to understand the other person with nothing to argue back with allowed all the attention to be on her. And during the process, of course, there was things mentioned that I was able to understand again through analyzing in the same way of what I did wrong. And so what another person does wrong to you we still have to take that into accountability of understanding what we did wrong ourselves, to understand why the other person caused that type of action or emotion, And so at that point, it led me to another analyzation of, well, why did that person do this to me, or why did that person do that to me? And so I had to then understand the cause and effects. Now, the cause and effects are easy to understand because there's always a cause, and every cause there's an effect. Now, the effect's not always, it's not always the effect that you would want it to be, but you're dealing with another person. Everybody has their own choice of being, and everybody makes their own action. And so even though there might be things that a person can say like, well, why'd you do that? I didn't do that, or I don't understand. You still have to look at the downfalls of what you could have done different. And so I did so, and understanding even the most dumbest things that really you would think, like, why would that cause an effect? Like, you're still doing right. You're still doing right in life. Why would that cause an effect? It's still effective towards the other person, even if it is something small. And so, doing so, I was able to understand why the other person did whatever they did towards me, and I was able to forgive it and let go. Forgiving and let go, it also required a sense of a choice or decision of wanting to be with the person or not. Because a person could just say, you know what, forget it, like, I don't want to do this anymore, and still find forgiveness and understanding. But when a person sees that something never got to work out because of these little causes and effect, then it puts a person in a sense of motion of, we were missing something the whole time, able to do something in life, right, that we never knew of. And so that always helps, when it comes to forgiving another person. Most people hold the grudge. Most people don't let it go. Most people will learn from their mistake and put it in their little organization of, I'm not going to do that again because it brought me to that point. But being able to forgive means that you're able to allow yourself to do something different, because you won't reflect on that situation when it happens again. And so forgiveness is quite simple when you're able to understand, your own truth of what caused it to happen and what was the effect. It's all about self-analyzing and being truthful to yourself, and confronting it very humbly and compassionately and so forth. And the other person's not always going to be quite calm about it. They're going to put up an argument and a fight and all that. And it might not fix all the problems, but it'll fix all the understandings and the karmatic events that come with it. Being able to let go in some situations. In my situation, it is difficult, but it did allow a new beginning, and it opened up a different way of confronting life and doing things different in many different ways. From there, judgment occurs whether the other person wants to believe you or not, or create an act of judgment. The act of judgment shouldn't be in a person. It shouldn't it shouldn't be from a person.